Okay, just wanted to say hi to everyone. I think we're going to get started. I'm sure there'll be some people who join in, but we want to just be a little respectful of your time and kind of get started right on time. So I'll just start by saying really thank you so much for joining us today. Um, we are just going to have basically three of us who are going to act as your panel members today. So Jim Plakis and myself are directors with Volleyball Alberta, as well as we have Carrie McDonald joining us, who's a director of Sports Science, Medicine and Innovation with Volleyball Canada. Sonia Johnson's acting as our moderator today, so she will be collecting all of your questions in the chat and we'll be putting them together to pose to us at the end of this session. I just also wanted to acknowledge all of our staff and board members who have worked with us to respond as quickly as possible to the Government of Alberta's recent announcement that sport was now being moved up into phase 2 of the relaunch strategy. So we've had the privilege of connecting with several of you already, but we're super happy to see how many of you were able to join us and support us in this session and are willing to share your thoughts, ideas, and questions with us. This is a unique opportunity for all of us to work together to ensure we're doing what is best for our sport. Prevention of COVID obviously starts with awareness. So it continues to be a risk for all of us. And we want to just thank you for sharing your time to educate yourself about the return to volleyball guidelines. We cannot emphasize enough that we need to take a well thought out, gradual approach to relaunch. Our goal is to minimize risk of illness and injury for all of our participants. What is right for the government may not necessarily be right for volleyball or for your specific organization or club. So we're just asking that you use these guidelines as part of your critical analysis in your decision-making process. We would like to consider your specific context, whether it's the age of your athletes, the ability of your athletes, whether they're multi-sport, single sport, what type of program that you typically offer or would be looking to offer, and obviously your comfort level as well before you continue in the relaunch. Right now, I'll just ask Carrie McDonald to speak a little bit about the work that he's been doing and involved with as part of the Sport Medicine Advisory Council group.
Thanks, Diane. Yeah, first off, I guess I do want to commend Volleyball Alberta. I think they've been put in a fairly difficult situation. I don't think any province has changed their timelines as rapidly for return to sport as Alberta has, and I am working with all the other provinces as well on their return to sport guidelines. So this has all happened really, really quickly. So I just want to commend Volleyball Alberta, first of all, for turning things around as quickly as you've had to do so. The other thing is, yeah, I work with the Sport Medicine Advisory Council, which is a group set up with Canadian Olympic Committee and Own the Podium and Sport Canada. And we've been getting a lot of information. I'm working with that group since early, actually in March, around COVID and response strategies. And just a couple of kind of general themes that I wanted to make sure everyone's aware of. One is that the plan that we're putting in place right now and that Volleyball Alberta is putting in place in your context is the plan as of today. So it's relative and relevant on June 18th. And what we're quickly realizing with COVID, and really this is a pandemic. It's our first time ever going through this. We've never dealt with this before. Even our own assessment of risk from an individual perspective, as well as how we're assessing risk as an organization and even as a province, is varying with time. So I think we just need to understand that things are going to change. So this is our plan, or the plan, I should say, of Volleyball Alberta at this time, and this will change. Things are going to change. Even within phases, you could see adjustments happening in allowable and non-allowable activities. And then the second piece that I just kind of want to make sure we're really aware of is there's almost an expectation that a second wave is going to happen. So when we talk with infectious disease experts in this space, that is what they're telling us, is that they almost anticipate that there will be a second wave. It's just a matter of when. And we don't know when it'll be. Most people are anticipating it'll be in October or November, but we don't know for sure, and we don't know if it'll ever come. But we just need to be prepared that it potentially could come, and it's better to be prepared for it than not. And one of the key pieces that's going to help us in managing a second wave is really going to be our ability to communicate effectively, both from Volleyball Alberta to the members, but also from you as club directors and club organizers to your members. And how do we communicate that we have to now change what was normal a week ago or allowable a week ago may no longer be allowable as things have changed and as we've tried to adapt. So yeah, this is just a real stress, or a test, I should say, for us as sport. And it's really going to stress our communication systems, our decision-making systems, and we're going to learn a lot as we go. So just more than anything, just asking for patience as Volleyball Alberta works through this, as we as Volleyball Canada work through this, and as sport in general tries to work through how to navigate something that we've never done before. And before we started this, I did just mention briefly with Diane and Jim that, you know, for the most part, we're sport administrators. We are not infectious disease epidemiology experts. We're also not legal experts, and we're not lawyers on how to manage litigation and risk. And so there's a lot of areas that we're being thrown into that we've never had to deal with before. And I think just some patience as we navigate this, both for yourself and as for the organizations that you're working with, is really warranted. So I'll leave it there before getting too long-winded. So I hope that covers it, Diane.
Fabulous. Thanks, Carrie. I think that's a great start. So we're going to jump right through. We know that you guys have lots of questions, so we want to try and get through as many of the slides, so we give you guys that opportunity. So I get to be the lawyer. I'm just kidding. Not a lawyer. This is definitely not legal advice. It's just, this is an opportunity for us to provide you guys with a little bit more insight into our situation. If you have specific legal advice, again, we are going to advise you that you follow up with your own legal counsel. The other resource that you can use is Basketball Alberta just actually did a town hall earlier this week in which they did have someone from the Sport and Law Strategy Group speak. So you may find it useful to just look into that resource and listen to that section of their town hall. So basically the main concern for an organization right now is always attributed to the threat of a lawsuit due to negligence. So in order to have a successful lawsuit, a plaintiff would basically have to prove that the following elements existed for it to be successful. So one is, do we have a duty of care? Did we breach the standard of care? And basically the standard of care talks about what is reasonable during the circumstances. Can we prove causality? So in this case, could someone prove that they did get COVID from coming to a volleyball event? Obviously, you can ask lots of questions. So, you know, did someone stop at a gas station on the way to your sport, or did they go to a grocery store? So causality may be more difficult to prove. However, if we looked at, say, your participants within a given event, if the majority of them had COVID-19, that obviously increases potential link to causality. As well, did someone suffer any loss or damages? Again, when we look at the context of COVID, likely if someone did contract COVID from one of our sporting programs, most people would only have mild symptoms. Therefore, potential damages would be harder to be proven. In terms of risk management techniques, there's basically a few different ones. So the best way to demonstrate our compliance with the standard of care is to follow guidelines set out by Alberta Health Services, by your governing bodies, so Volleyball Alberta and Volleyball Canada. The other thing to look at is checking how your governance model works. So potentially clubs who are registered under the Societies Act, they have what would be called a corporate shield. So your club basically is a legal entity on its own. So it wouldn't be up to the individual board members who could potentially get sued, it's rather the club itself. So incorporating is a way to protect yourself, and therefore clubs and our clubs who are registered as under the Alberta Societies Act may decide that it's better for them to start earlier, or they may be more willing to open earlier than someone who isn't set up with a corporate shield. We also want to talk about the use of waivers. So we did provide waivers with the materials for this session tonight. And specificity is really important when we're looking at the validity of a waiver, which is why we have included those updated waivers. So some of the waivers we included tonight were both that event participation waiver, as well as a remote training and facility use waiver. The remote training waiver would be utilized. So let's say a club would typically practice within a gym. Maybe you've decided that you want to take that practice outdoors to a field where you typically wouldn't be at. That would be a great use or a great time to use the remote training waiver. We've set up the waivers to list both Volleyball Alberta and left a space blank for you to insert your club name, and you can take a closer look there. Carrie, again, not a lawyer, but did you have any other insights in terms of risk management?
Yeah, I think the only other one is the daily screening and attestation is just something that is really new for us. We've used waivers, and I think we're all familiar with waivers in the past, but we've never been in a situation where we need to do something on a daily basis. So I think that's one of the new behavioral pieces that's new to us, is the ability to do an actual daily attestation or a daily screen. And I think that, yeah, just from what's really a new component is that. And then maybe the only other thing I will mention is one thing that will really help us from the legality perspective is documenting our process and then recording that we're actually executing on it. So if we have a sanitation process that we know we're going to go through, as say if we have a facility that we utilize, do we have it documented when it was last sanitized or when it was last cleaned, or do we have a process of doing that? So those would just be two things on our end from Volleyball Canada that I think would be worth considering. I think you're muted, Diane.
Sorry, thanks, Harry. I was like, and you're jumping a few slides ahead. We do have some of that later, but that's awesome to reiterate anyways. So some of our general guidelines for all of the different stages that we have in our progression for return to volleyball, we're just going to review. So first one is record keeping. So we do want to ensure that, yes, both the retention of the waivers are important to legally protect your club. So using those contact attendance logs, obviously we're using those from the public health contact tracing efforts in the event that a participant does test positive for COVID-19. We also want to review that providing information is voluntary for participants. The organization must obtain an individual's consent to notify them about the purpose and legal authority for the collection of the materials. Also want to remind you that your club must make reasonable security arrangements to protect personal information, and the attendance log should be retained for 3 months and destroyed after that period in accordance with the Personal Information and Protection Act. Alberta Health Services, if you look on their websites, it does recommend only keeping those attendance logs for 2 weeks or longer, but our legal counsel has advised us to hold on to them a little bit longer. And we just ask that if a club is contacted by Alberta Health Services, that you would also inform us that there was a potential exposure. Just to echo what Carrie said, it's really important that we don't just have procedures, we can prove that we followed our procedures. So as many records as you can take, if you said you would post signage, make sure you maybe take a picture that that signage was actually posted. If you said you were going to do something, again, any video, photographic, and just all those record keeping is really important. As well, making sure that it's not just us as, let's say, club directors or the administrators who understand all of our contingency planning. It's also someone on site is designated as a person who knows what to do. And if there is a participant who does become symptomatic during a session, that they are required to be isolated from others and must return home immediately. If you obviously had younger individuals that you need to make sure that you have, or the person on site has the parents or guardians' contact information, so we could facilitate that as quickly as possible. Okay, in terms of facility guidelines, so the facility regulations have been set out by the Government of Alberta. Modifications will be made as to how each specific facility will operate. So you should be in contact with the facilities that you're going to be using ahead of time, just to ask about their updated procedures and protocols, and that will help you in terms of your communication with participants. So some of the changes could be whether it's the entry and exit procedures, which is really important for when people are being, well, to facilitate quick drop off and pickup, if those are in different locations, as well that transition time between groups. It'll also help you know what their cleaning schedule is, so you can communicate that to your members as well. Some best practices include the following. COVID-19, it can be transmitted if someone touches a contaminated surface and then touches their face without washing their hands. While many activities involve shared equipment among the participants, so whether it's coaches, staffs, instructors, officials, or volunteers, and in our case it would be volleyball, which is probably the most common, we need to understand that the virus doesn't enter the body through the skin, it enters through our eyes, our nose, our mouth, and when an individual touches their face, which is why regular hand hygiene and the cleaning of high-touch surfaces are so important. So we really need to consider that hand hygiene and where it fits within the context of our sport. So let's say you stopped for a water break. Well, some of the water bottles might have where athletes have unclean hands, they're now opening the top of a water bottle and drinking right there. So just making sure that we facilitate with athletes to clean their hands prior to touching their water bottles or eating or drinking within maybe a practice. Again, we want to limit all of that stuff. We also want to talk about just some of our common practices. So let's say stretching or cool down. We want to avoid athletes having contact with that floor, which is like when your mouth and face are really close to that surface. That could probably be a source of infection. So whether we want to consider whether cool down should happen in a separate location than the training environment itself, or when we're doing some stretching, doing or making choices that are upright instead of in close contact with the floor. While we talk about the use of masks, I just want to clarify that that would only be for potentially coaches, training staff, administrators, and not for athletes. I think everyone knows that, but I just want to put that out there as well. In terms of cheering and singing, obviously they have a higher risk because infected people can transmit the virus through their saliva or respiratory droplets. So we just want to have that conversation with athletes ahead of time. As well, we want to make sure that we do have higher concerns for at-risk individuals. So depending on the age of participants or their specific health conditions, they may choose not to attend volleyball activities, or they may want to get additional medical clearance to participate. We also want to be a little aware that some athletes may be living with high-risk individuals. So we want to ensure that we're not pressuring people to attend situations that could put their family members at higher risk of exposure. In terms of spectators, the biggest thing for spectators is that early communication with them is critical. We want to have those coordinated drop-off and pick-up procedures. We want to eliminate having a conversation or have someone show up to our gym and be upset when we have potentially turned them away. We really do want to minimize or discourage any spectator attendance. If they have to be there, again, just stress that need for physical distancing. This is an interesting situation in terms of Government of Alberta because they do say that gathering sizes for indoors is 50, and yet for sporting events, they said that you can have up to a maximum of 100 spectators. So it's a bit of a contradiction. Again, we would just ask you to look at your program and ask yourself if spectators really are necessary.
And Diane, if I can just
Yep.
in the waivers and with the daily screening, that's when we're talking about drop-offs and parents coming by with the daily screening requirement, and if you have a minor there and the adult needs to sign for them, that's another consideration. But can they come in, sign off on the daily screening, and then leave the facility before the and then come back to pick up the athlete is another consideration.
Absolutely. And can we have some of that collected ahead of time electronically so there isn't paper that's being passed back and forth? The thing I should add to the waivers is waivers with just a checkbox are not as effective or don't hold up as well as something that has someone's actual signature on that. So we can look into, like I said, electronic means of collecting that information, and that does reduce some of that day one, but we also have to be aware that not everyone has access to that technology. So just having a process in place, or potentially on day one, really staggering the arrival of your participants, just to be aware that there might be a little bit of gathering to facilitate all of the waivers. Other than that, I am going to turn this over to Jim to do some of the speaking, just in terms of taking us through the progressions for our return to volleyball.
Okay, thanks, Diane. Being on all these Zoom calls, I also notice how much I actually touch my face. So it's a reminder, but I'm still not very good or well practiced at it. So individual skill or individual training and skill development. This would be the safest progression. Obviously, physical distancing can easily be maintained between one instructor and one athlete. And then we'll repeat this a few times throughout the rest of the presentation, but outdoor versus indoor. Obviously, outdoor activities is considered safer, so we would encourage groups to utilize that whenever possible. The other thing we're also doing that, or going to be doing, is looking at renting our outdoor nets. So we're just kind of coordinating those processes. So groups might be able to rent their nets or rent our nets from us so that they can facilitate programming outside. So we'll try to get information out there on that through our newsletter and social media as soon as that's ready. Rule of two, another important thing, we're also asking for smaller numbers because that's safer, but we still have to be managing safety from a rule of two perspective. So 2 screened adults is ideal. If not, then 1 screened adult with another adult presence is a best practice. And then there's also some specific drills for this progression for individual training on the Ontario Volleyball Association website. And we'll have some of those links when we post this document as well. So there's just some other hints and progressions or drills that groups can use. Then moving to the next slide of small group training and skills camps. Basically, you really want to use cones, lines, benches, arrows, whatever, just to safely create physical separation of the athletes. Obviously, we just want to use physical distancing as much as possible, particularly in this phase. And then using visual cues will really help younger athletes in particular be able to navigate that. So whatever you guys can utilize to emphasize those pieces is likely really helpful. And then smaller groups, as usual, is always safer with any activity with COVID. And but what's most important is maintaining physical distancing practices, which is what this phase involves. So really important to kind of use those cues to help utilize that and maintain that. And then in the next stage, or the next, I guess, comment of removal of physical distancing. The younger athlete might be less necessary to move into progressions that don't include physical distancing. There might be a bigger need or a more necessity for an athlete that's a bit older to kind of move to this next phase. But ultimately, whenever you remove physical distancing guidelines, it puts participants at a higher level of risk. So we need to be aware of that and utilize that when we feel it's necessary and appropriate. And then organizations, as a result, may also be exposed to increased levels of liability. And then organizers must clearly communicate to their participants about the restrictions and regulations of being involved in a cohort group. So, and then jumping a little bit back to liability, and Carrie alluded to this earlier on, but Alberta's relaunch is far more progressive than other jurisdictions in the country, and there's no right or wrong way necessarily, but there needs to be a discussion about what the pros and cons are in your decision-making process to offer programming that doesn't include physical distancing. So it just needs to be a well-thought-out discussion and consideration when you're doing that. And then we're going to move into a confusing part, and hopefully we can make it a little simpler here by defining what a cohort is. So we'll just kind of go through each one point by point. Any cohort or any activity without physical distancing of 2 meters should be considered a cohort group. Cohort groups in the stage 2 relaunch cannot exceed 50 people. So it's a maximum of 50 people, and this includes coaches, referees, trainers, anyone that's involved in that activity that cannot maintain social distance or physical distancing. Excuse me. And then what's really important to note is that individuals can only be involved in one sport or performing cohort group. And that was a really important thing. And then the government really wants cohort groups to remain together during stage 2 of the relaunch. We did clarify this point, even though that's a main tenet of what they wanted, but They're also allowing someone to leave a cohort if they wanted to join a different sport cohort or a performing cohort. It's not necessarily their intention, but they are allowing that. We did get clarification through Dr. Hinshaw. We had quite a few town halls and discussions as it relates to this whole process through the various stages. But as it relates to that, if someone was to move to a separate cohort group, they would have to be symptom-free for 14 days before they could rejoin a separate group. So that's a critical piece. And then cohorts must be well managed by an organizer. So one person has to manage that cohort to ensure that all the guidelines are being followed. In addition to, there is a specific question about that in our daily screening, that one of those documents that we did include in the invite earlier today, and asking if the individual is aware about being involved in this cohort and making sure they're not involved in a separate cohort, because that would violate the provisions of what a cohort group is. Excuse me. And then just a few other points as it relates to this. We definitely have always encouraged multi-sport participation as a pillar of our athlete development model. However, a choice to offer cohorts do limit participants' options. So we really want our groups that are organizing volleyball activities in cohorts to make sure that they're aware of that. Even the adults, they also need to be aware of that if they're doing any sort of adult sport cohort. Participation in multiple activities is possible if physical distancing is maintained in those activities. So someone can be involved in a sport cohort with volleyball, but they can also do other sports or activities, provided that those activities are maintaining physical distancing at all times. And the choice of performing or sport cohorts needs to be made with the athlete's mental well-being in mind. I think an educated and well thought out decision and choice should be made, considered, and then examining the frequency of offerings between one cohort versus the other, and looking at what the best fit for that individual athlete or person should be considered. And 1 week camps or a couple of day camps wasn't necessarily the government's intention of developing a cohort. So ideally camps in that format can be set up so that they include physical distancing, so that those athletes can potentially be involved in a separate performing or sport cohort. So. And if you guys do have questions about this, please enter anything into the chat and we can address those later on, because it is a bit of a confusing subject. And then moving on to the next slide, small group training and skills camps without physical distancing. Essentially, this is a progression. It's just for a cohort for a smaller number of participants. So I think what's really important is you don't need to have a cohort group of 50 participants. You can have a smaller group of 20 or 25, and smaller cohort sizes definitely limits risks for both the participants as well as the organizing group. So that's just one piece on that. And then moving on to the next slide of small group competitions and mini leagues. I think a big part of this and what we'll see is moving forward is with beach leagues. I know even in Edmonton, I believe the Edmonton Sport and Social Club, they're looking at starting, potentially opening up and using it as a mini league cohort. So they'll presumably set up their groups into groups of 50 or less, and then they'll follow these guidelines, and other adult groups or groups that want to facilitate some form of a competition will be doing that. So obviously, beach competitions would make or outdoor grass even would make the most sense moving forward this summer. And then on the last side, large group competitions. Currently, there aren't any guidelines yet from the government. Presumably, phase 3 they'll have those in place. The good thing is Volleyball Canada has already jumped on developing guidelines for groups to facilitate competitions. And then I'll let Carrie speak to that a little bit and let the group know where they're at as it relates to facilitating competitions and what guidelines, considerations you guys might be able to expect.
Yeah, so on the volleyball Canada side, this was one of the first things we did start working on, and we've consulted a lot with a couple documents. One is the World Health Organization has a document for group gatherings and considerations there. USAV, our partner, has also put out some information around event hosting guidelines when it comes to this. So we're working on that document internally as well from a Volleyball Canada perspective on what it looks like to try and host a larger scale event or tournament type format. So that is something that we're working on our level, understanding, however, that anything we create at the NSO level is really a guiding document and will only be it'll give a bit of a roadmap. However, you kind of have to look at two maps at the same time. So you'll have to look at our map as well as look at your regional or provincial maps and what is allowable within your region. So we are working on this. And then the other thing I'll allude to is we are going to be updating our rules and protocols for our sport. So a couple things that you can probably predict will be changes or revisions to our rule book for this year, COVID specific, will be things around side switches, shaking hands, coin tosses, signing score sheets, items that just don't allow us to physically distance that are currently mandatory components or written currently into our rules or our protocols. So we are rewriting those and those will be coming out shortly as well.
Carrie, if I can just ask a quick question as it relates to that. Is consideration given maybe for the referees to try to maintain physical distancing with players or whatnot, just as it relates to where Alberta's gone with cohort groups? It would probably be really good if our referees can be physically distanced from those athletes so they're not limited to being attached to a certain cohort and only being able to referee one group or one level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jim. And that's exactly what we're doing. So we're changing the rules so it'll allow for officials to be physically distancing at all times. So even how captains approach referee stands will be adjusted, how coin tosses are occurred, and how people sign score sheets, and actually even how referees interact with scorekeepers to help to allow for physical distancing. So those are all protocols that we're putting in place on our level. Before we even knew that Alberta was going to be doing cohorts, we're fortunate that that was already, we were thinking of that.
Awesome. Thanks, Carrie. We're just going to move on to what I know is one of the concerns of our clubs is just talking about the signing policy and how it integrates. So we just wanted to kind of bring this to our attention. We know as clubs, as coaches, as athletes and parents, everyone is eager to return to club, and we definitely are too. So we feel where you're coming from and your frustrations. Just wanted to cover that our athlete development committee is working on an updated signing policy. Clubs, as part of that, will be given an opportunity to re-sign returning athletes first. However, we just don't have enough line of sight right now to understand potential competition models. Some of the stuff that comes into play here is we don't even know what our school reopening plan is. We're not sure if the school reopening plan will change the school sports seasons of play. We're not sure what the phase 3 sport guidelines are. We have to look at potential facility restrictions, availability, cost, whether there's going to be regional concerns. Potentially facility access may not be the same across the province. We do know specifically in Calgary that there's a lot more private facility access than maybe would be available in other areas of the province. So all of these things meld together with just a whole lot of unknown right now. We just want to say that this really is an opportunity to reevaluate our sport, to consider changes for improvements. We really love that already we've heard so many clubs who are already working together and talking and coming together to solve problems with this, and we really, really appreciate that. One of our concerns as an overall sport is really our athlete and member retention. We know there's so many financial concerns out there for many families. Are they going to be able to afford to return to sport? Obviously, not to mention all of the health concerns as well. We have to look at potentially adapting our model. When we look as our sport as a whole, we really had that club level, and we haven't had a ton of development in terms of a second tier. There have been limited house leagues. Maybe we need to look at developing more, looking at a more of a regional competition model to limit costs and limit exposure. athletes. Really, we just want to thank you for being creative and working together for creative solutions, as well as just opening those doors for conversations. Ultimately, whatever we do moving forward, we really want to make sure that we maintain that it is an athlete-centered approaches. Athletes are first, so as adults, we don't want athletes jumping from club to club. We really want to make sure that we are putting their health and their risk really at the top of our priority list. Potentially when we look at our previous models, they've been one, and maybe clubs have been hosting lots of different open gyms to determine which athletes to sign. Athletes are often attending multiple sessions in 1 week, and sometimes even multiple sessions on the same night. So if physical distancing measures are not in place, we're really putting our entire sport at risk and potentially having our sport be the source of or center of an outbreak, which is definitely not what any of us want. So just want to reiterate that we really do need to take a slow and a measured approach to launching our signing policy, as speed may come at the expense and health and safety, at the health and safety of our athletes. We have to focus on where our sport relaunch is at right now, instead of spending so much time and energy prioritizing a future season that is really highly dependent on our current actions and our current approach. Our 2021 season is in jeopardy if our response is not appropriate right now. So that's why we just want to make sure that we really are working together, taking the time to think things all the way through and making sure we really are staying athlete-centered. And in terms of our signing policy, we'll definitely update our clubs as soon as our timeframes have been determined. We have added a few resources here. Again, we will provide this presentation to you, as well as there's more resources that are being developed every day. Different provinces takes on things. So it is important to read a bunch of different resources and see what works for you in your current context. So we'd now like to take the time to answer some of the questions. So I'll turn things over to our moderator.
The first few questions came around asking, is there a best practice or specific disinfecting products that you would recommend for the Mikasa ball and shared equipment?
Carrie, I'm going to throw that one at you, please.
Yeah, it's a good question. Best practices, right now, I wouldn't say that we have a great grasp on this. This is something that we have actually reached out a little bit to. We know that it's a 70% alcohol content is what's considered medical grade for sanitation. Most Lysol disinfecting wipes or light types such as that are also considered beneficial. We did, actually, I think you guys do you have a link to the Mikasa document? Do you want to maybe mention that one, Diane? If I have it here.
Yeah, we did have it listed as part of our resources, so we can distribute that at the end of this meeting as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good starting spot. And then the last thing I'll just mention is that there is a list. The Government of Canada does have a list of approved products for sanitation, and so you can actually search for products, and there's an actual approval process on the Government of Canada website. So I can also share that link with Jim or Diane to pass on as well.
Is there currently a best practice on the maximum number of participants allowed on a court?
I'll leave that to Carrie if I need to add my 2 bits, but go ahead, Carrie.
Yeah, what I'll just say is that it's a really good one. I think that it again depends if you're trying to physically distance or not. If that's not a consideration, then obviously you have no worries. Usually most guidelines that we're seeing, and again, I haven't specifically looked at what is stated within in Alberta's actual guidelines, but for example, I know I was just looking at the Quebec one. It's 1 person per 4 square meters. Other provinces have stated per 6 square meters. So it depends on your space and is everybody on the court itself. So that's some of the calculations that we're seeing is 1 person per 4 or between 4 and 6 square meters. But again, I'm going to say there's a lot of subjectivity on this and not a lot of science.
Yeah, and I will just add, again, Alberta's guidelines from the government are way more progressive right now, and we're in a much further stage than most other provinces. So when we look at, an actual system, we're just asking everyone to look at the guidelines, look at the context that you're working with, and try and make sure that you're doing what's in the best and safest interest for your athletes.
Mr. Plakis, did you have an addition to that?
No, I think that was a good response. Like Carrie alluded to, we haven't been exposed to this scenario very much to gather a lot of scientific evidence to really give some good guidelines. So like Diane said, I think we just need to use the context that we're working with, and smaller numbers, more distance is going to be safer. So, and obviously outdoors. So I would just reinforce those points.
There are a few questions moving towards warm-up protocols and execution of matches. The first being probably to Carrie, will warm-up protocols change looking at how one team is isolated for a particular time frame and then another?
Yeah, I can tell you that currently in the draft version, and this still does need to be approved, but in the current draft version right now is one team is warming up at a time on court. The other team is not using the free space at the end of the court. The other team is actually isolated to their own bench or their own designated area off to the side of the court. So it's one team per time on the court, also not sharing warm-up balls. So each team is to provide their own balls for warm-up. And what else on the warm-up side? I think that's the main thing. Just one team at a time on court.
If balls are controlled to the teams, do you have a recommendation in place for the 3-ball system or an alternate during the match?
Yeah, so we are actually recommending a 3-ball system for all indoor volleyball, and with the purpose of that when the ball is off, it will actually, there's the ability to sanitize that ball as well. So essentially, it's similar to how you would designate someone to potentially be linesing the game. You would actually have designated someone to act as each team would designate one person to help act with that 3-ball execution. So there'd be 3 balls per match is our recommendation, with the ball then potentially being sanitized while it's not in play. But that would be, and it could be with a spray or a wipe or something of that nature. But actually implementing a 3-ball at all levels of indoor.
There are some follow-up questions looking at the division of beach, whether it's considered a sport or will be left as if social distancing can be maintained, if they can be excluded from the consideration of cohort grouping.
Well, as it's defined in the government document, if you can have physical distancing of 2+ meters between all the participants throughout your activity, then you don't have to designate as a cohort. So that's really the main factor. If you cannot facilitate your activity where 2 meters of physical distancing, you can't have that maintained, then they would have to be designated as a sport cohort. And another resource that I will also share and will put up is for beach volleyball specifically, the German Volleyball Federation did a pretty neat video, and you don't even need to speak German to figure out what they've done in terms of some of the rule guidelines, so that they can you can actually have a 2-on-2 beach volleyball or a grass volleyball with physical distancing. So we'll include that as a resource just for people to have some context related around how that might look.
Does shared equipment not eliminate the opportunity to physical distance?
Correct. And we did get clarification from our sport and activity, physical activity branch as it relates to that, because earlier on there was a lot of indications that if their shared equipment was really an issue, and it's still a level of concern, but where they're really concerned about is the prolonged physical distancing and even prolonged physical distancing. So sharing, so if you were to do a small group training with physical distancing, you have 4 athletes, 2 on one side, 2 on the other, able to maintain physical distancing. They're sharing balls. That's okay. We still want those balls to be replaced frequently or disinfected frequently. We still want those other hand washing and sanitizing measures in place during those activities. But just because they're using that shared ball doesn't mean that they are now considered part of that cohort. So those athletes, if the activity included physical distancing, they could be a part of a separate cohort. But those other mitigating factors and measures need to be implemented for the safety of the participants.
With the challenge of a slightly undefined signing period at the moment, how does Volleyball Alberta wish to enforce the signing period versus cohorts versus quote unquote team practices?
Sorry, there was quite a few bits there. Diane, did you want to start? And I'll add in. You were making notes and I was trying to hear all those pieces.
I think I got all of them. So I said
Okay.
signing period, team practice, and cohorts. Was that correct?
You are correct.
Fabulous. I think the only thing in terms of signing and the only document that's still going to be binding is the athlete agreement, which still can't be signed. So as much as there are, or could be, I suppose, verbal agreements as they are every year, they're nothing that we can enforce. So we would just encourage, again, that our coaches and club administrators really respect the fact that in this period where there's so much unknown for families, so much financial implications and potential health implications, that we're not putting them in a position where we're asking them to sign up for something that may cost them more money in a time where they might not even be able to afford putting food on the table, or that they're looking forward to a season that we don't know what it's going to come yet. So I guess that would be one aspect. In terms of cohorts, again, hopefully with up to 50, that we're not actually putting them in specific teams yet. So I think I'll start with that. Jim, did you want to jump in?
Just about the cohort training, or?
I suppose we probably still need to address the aspect of team practice versus cohorts.
Yeah, well, there are no, like, we're sort of in a period where we're waiting for the signing policy and process to be established. So, excuse me, there is no, I guess, teams formulated. And I guess the one thing that does happen are camps and clinics. We've always encouraged clubs in the off seasons not to facilitate camps and clinics, but obviously they're still private organizations and clubs are free to do that. There's a difference between running activities versus signing athletes. So we haven't established the signing process or the period yet, and we would just even discourage even the conversations about signing, and for the reasons Diane alluded to previously, just as it relates to, there's just too many unknowns, and we really don't know what the future looks like. So we're kind of in a very unique scenario.
Will Volleyball Alberta be providing mitigation strategies that clubs can utilize or guidelines that need to be followed?
Mitigation strategies as it relates to COVID, I guess. I just want to make sure that...
You are correct, Jim.
Yeah. Well, I think our return to volleyball document has some of those. So for those people that did get the invite, that was included. Keep in mind it's a draft, hopefully it's close to, but there are a number of mitigation factors and ideas and recommendations for facilities, for organizing groups, and for participants. So those are outlined in that document, and those are likely going to get changed and updated as the information gets revised and updated as well. So that is in the our Return to Volleyball document, which will hopefully be published on our website next week once it's finalized.
I'll maybe just add in that Volleyball Canada Return to Volleyball document has 2 pages of mitigating strategies, and that is also being updated and it's being translated currently. So there'll also be a resource there on the mitigating strategies coming from Volleyball Canada.
Thanks so much, team. Sorry as they're coming up. Not quite in the systematic flow, so I appreciate you being agile. If January comes and ASAA moves their volleyball season, is there consideration about what happens with overlapping seasons to protect athletes in the return to sport?
We've been in contact with the Alberta School Athletic Association, and we did include a memo in the invite from the ASAA just so that clubs can see where they're currently at and what their status is. But they did bring up the fact that if they had to postpone or move or push their season of play, and what would be some of the concerns with volleyball if there was an overlap. So we did I'll definitely outline some of those concerns so they are aware that wouldn't be ideal. And I think they would make measures to try to avoid that. But if they had to, then I think they would definitely be a shortened season where the overlap, if there was one, wouldn't be very significant. And I think we also want to know where their plans are, so that plays into what our signing policy and process looks like too. So particularly if they are not going in the fall, that definitely potentially changes what our signing policy and process would look like as well. So we're trying to gather information, but once again, they're waiting on their superintendents and principals and school districts to get to them. And once those decisions are made, I think the sports are going to be a few weeks behind that. So well, we've definitely been in contact with ASAA and some of our other partners.
Jim, will also add to that when we were speaking to ASAA, one of our concerns that we brought up very clearly was just our concern for load management on our athletes if they were trying to participate both in a club season as well as return to high school. And in fact, it's also a topic even just when we're talking about returning to sport after a time where a whole bunch of our athletes have maybe not participated or been as active. So we are actually currently working with Carlin Stilling to get a session prepared for our membership and just talking about load management and progressive load management as we all return to sport, which I know is Carrie's area of expertise, but we are trying to facilitate that as well. And hopefully by next week, but if not, it's for sure a concern that we would like to address.
Diane, is Volleyball Alberta able to give guidance or suggested resources for both corporate shield protection as well as for non-incorporated clubs in terms of liability responsibility?
Okay, well, I'll do my best to answer this. Again, not a lawyer. I think you have to look at your own risk, right? So if you're not incorporated, look at what it takes to actually be incorporated through the Societies Act. It typically is not a lot of money to become incorporated, but you also have to understand that there can be things that you do need to do. So that could be a little bit of time consuming, but even when we look in terms of your ability to grow as an organization, let's say personally, I wouldn't want it on my family that, my house could, someone could come after my house if my organization was liable. And so we would always obviously encourage people to look at incorporation under the Societies Act. Did I answer the complete question? I think the other strategies for people who already are incorporated, again, is just to ensure that you can justify the decisions that you're making. So again, are you doing things that are in compliance with what the government of Alberta says, with what the Volleyball Canada, Volleyball Alberta documents are? Have you done all of those waivers? Have you clearly communicated and trained your staff? All of those are risk management strategies. And so it's one thing to do it, it's another thing to record that you're doing it, which is, I think, what we kind of alluded to earlier in the presentation.
Will Volleyball Alberta be maintaining a COVID landing page or something that keeps our club participants up to date?
I think right now we have just a resources page, but definitely we'll go back to just the fact that, let's say, until last week, we were assuming sport, and specifically in Alberta, wasn't coming in until potentially even after phase 3 or at the end of phase 3. So we'll be the first to apologize that we are still gathering information, and we wanted to make sure we took the time to have everything accurate before we posted it on our website. So this was even a bit of a test run to see if, while you guys all read that document for the first time, if there was any feedback. We can kind of address that right away in our document, and we're hoping to have everything posted as soon as possible. So if not tomorrow, we will have it up and have a page by next week.
As continued questions come up going forward, how would VA like that to be administered? To particular individuals, certain mediums? What do you prefer?
So we have a bit of a shortened staff right now. So there are 5 of us who are currently full-time. You can definitely email your questions to any of us, and we are able to distribute it internally as to the best staff person who can address that. So Jim has taken, I think, the staff lead in terms of our return to volleyball progressions, though.
Yeah, you can, I would suggest those can come into me first, and then if I need to pass them along to somebody else that's better prepared or better able to respond, then definitely we'll do that.
Rapid fire, way to go panel. At the moment, that is the current set of questions posed by our amazing membership.
I'll maybe just add quickly, there was the question around the sanitation. I'm just following up as well with Macassa, because Macassa Canada has been working on a guideline for proper sanitation of the ball and what's appropriate or not. So I'm just sent another note and kind of in some back and forth right now with them. So hopefully there'll be more to come specifically on ball sanitation directly from Macassa.
I'll also just jump in as a resource, as Carrie did just share that with Jim and myself as well. Volleyball BC does have a landing page right now as well for their return to play and COVID documentation. So we always borrow and learn from each other. And to be fair, all our executive directors across the country and Volleyball Canada have been on weekly or bi-weekly calls since this all began. So we all are happy to share with each other. We really ultimately want what's best for volleyball in Canada.
There's a few shout outs that are coming to the panel, and I want to make sure that both the members, the clubs they represent, the programs they represent, and the staff and our administration recognize, let the panel know that they're doing a great job. Your efforts are appreciated, especially under these dynamic circumstances. And they're definitely in recognition of what everybody here is trying to do for youth sport.
I'll just say thank you. I think, as Carrie said, we're all learning, and we are really all in this together. So continue to share, continue to let us know what you need guidance on, and we will definitely try to network with people in sport across Canada to get you the best answers that we can. And just understand it's changing, and if you don't hear from us, it's not that we're not working hard. We're just doing our best to make sure that whatever information we do provide, it's as accurate as it can be.
Yeah, and I just want to thank everyone for participating, not only tonight, but even in the club survey that was sent out to the directors a few weeks ago. It just really helps to get feedback and for us to use that and apply as much of that as possible. Also wanted to thank Carrie for taking time out of his evening and to join us. We really appreciate that. Carrie recently had a little accident with a bike, and hopefully he's recovered there from his mountain biking escapade. And also just to add on to what Diane had said, it's been a really busy time, and particularly the last several weeks, but even this week, Volleyball Canada is also having their convention. So there's been many meetings this week, and they continue on tomorrow and over the weekend. Yeah, if we don't get back to you right away, it's just because we're into it neck deep, but we'll definitely respond to questions and information that comes in through the email. So we just want to thank you for your participation and your involvement, and we definitely appreciate it.
Okay, well, I guess unless there are any other questions, we will end early. Again, we will follow up the meeting. If there is people who want a copy of the video, we will try and get that posted right away, as well as create that resource page and provide you with a PowerPoint that does have the link to all of the documentation. So again, just thank you so much for all of your time. We really do appreciate it.